Did you watch the Republican and Democratic national conventions? Did you come away swayed or affected? Well, today we'll ask the experts who soared, who sank, who delivered, and who dropped the ball, who left perhaps the most enduring impressions. Here with me are Yohuru Williams, Democratic analyst from Fairfield University, and a former New Jersey congressional candidate and New Jersey businessman Bill Spadea. Thank you both, gentlemen, for coming on board to chat with us.
Great to see you.
Let's talk quickly about your overall impressions of the convention. Whether you think they got a bump, whether they delivered what you may have expected, or whether they fell a little short. Bill, let me ask you first.
Well, I think the president clearly got a bump out of his convention, and look, he's a very articulate speaker. I don't know that he outshined his wife. I think Michelle Obama's speech was just, got rave reviews, and President Bill Clinton really did a very good job of making the case. That said, it was a heavy lift that the Democrats had, because this question is going to be raging through the upcoming debates, and certainly for the next 58, 57 days until the election. And that question is, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And when you look at some of the numbers, they had to really overcome these bad economic numbers and paint this very personal and positive picture of the president. And I think that's what they did. And, the numbers, at least nationally, reflect that. Of course, this election comes down to battleground states, and it's a local election. So the national polls notwithstanding, I think it's going to be very close in November.
Let me ask your impression also of the Republican convention.
Yeah, I think the Republicans did an excellent job on two fronts. One, Mitt Romney is not as effective, or at least as energetic a speaker as some of the other speakers. Certainly Ann Romney, just took the house down. She was fantastic. Paul Ryan gave a great speech. And I think it was an opportunity for the Republicans to really showcase some star leaders that they have. In particular, women who are governors. An interesting thing came out of the Republican convention, that the American people got to see that there are more women Republican governors than women Democratic governors. And I think that really is a little bit counterintuitive when people think, and they paint with that broad brush, thinking, wait, the women are all in the Democrat Party. Not so fast. And the Republicans really showed that well. Marco Rubio did a great job. Now, Romney did not get the same bounce that President Obama got out of his convention. Part of the problem was there were more people watching Honey Boo Boo and the reality shows than watching those speeches.
And certainly Romney is not as perhaps as fiery or as an effective an orator as the president is. But let me ask you on the Democratic side, Yohuru, your thoughts on both conventions?
Well, I agree with Bill in a lot of ways. Conventions historically are about narratives, about shaping for the American people what a political party wants to convey about itself, about its agenda, about its platform, and most importantly, about its candidate. And I think what the Republicans did well is recognize Romney's liability in terms of generating warmth. Ann Romney was a great choice. She did that very well. Paul Ryan, although there were some questions about the accuracy of some of the things he said, did a great job of being the candidate's attack dog and really taking on the president. And the same thing on the side for the Democrats. You have Michelle Obama, who does a masterful job of painting her husband as someone who's very caring. The president, of course, is a wonderful speaker. And then a slate of Democratic speakers who, again, spoke to the need to define the Democratic Party, again, not on the same message of hope and change that Obama ran on 2008, but on a message of consistency. Give the guy 4 more years, as Bill Clinton said, to finish the job that he started.
I want to talk about some of the video. We're going to roll a little of the video and ask you your impressions, and perhaps two of the most effective people on either side, Bill Clinton and Clint Eastwood. Let me ask you about both. We'll take a look at Clinton first, and let me ask you, Bill, from the opposing side of the political spectrum, how do you think he did? What was your impression of his speech?
Well, Bill Clinton he's a powerful speaker. And he drew those lines in the sand to essentially say, he tried to shape the argument to essentially say that, look, this is an 8-year proposition, not a 4-year proposition. And what was interesting about Bill Clinton's speech is that the president himself, when he was running as Senator Obama back in 2008, said, look, if I don't cut the deficit in half, this is a one-term proposition. So I think it took all of Bill Clinton's speech just to mitigate that quote from the president 4 years ago. But it's tough. I mean, he did his job, which was, let's go after the Republicans, let's blame these obstructionists in Congress. But, at the end of the day, the bounce, I think, came from people just like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton has better numbers than President Obama. From that perspective,
and 12 years after being impeached.
It's amazing. Look, he's a likable guy. He gives a great speech. But all of that flies in the face of the fact that we have unemployment that's been well over 8% for almost for 3.5 years now. You've got fact that gas prices have doubled since he took office. I mean,
but
those
it's fair
things
to say
really
the
hurt.
president doesn't have an effect on gas prices, and that's
Well,
the misnomer that people have been led to
I
believe.
think the president's policies have a general effect. And if you look at the comparison between the Republican convention and the Democratic convention specifically, the Democrats laid out a plan to say, here's how we're going to involve government in getting the economy back. And the Republican plan is, well, here's how we're going to create jobs and cut taxes and create economic growth, because your government revenue is going to go up if you create this economic prosperity. And that's the defining line between these two conventions. And I think Bill Clinton certainly articulated that in his speech. I mean, the Democrats are embracing big government and government solutions, and we'll see how it plays out.
And get you to respond to that.
Not necessarily a bad thing either, because what Bill Clinton was able to do very effectively is to talk about the ways in which Obama inherited these problems, and 4 years was simply not long enough in order for the president to be able to fully address them. I think the other important thing about Clinton is he is arguably the most popular living president of the 20th century. And people look at Bill Clinton as someone they can trust. There's a trust factor with Bill Clinton, primarily because he's someone who was able to reach across the aisle. His economic policies were very conservative. And so people trust when Bill Clinton, who created these surpluses that, of course, people argue the Bush administration squandered away, when he says, we can't double down on trickle down, that resonates with people who say, let's give Obama another opportunity to finish the job.
Let me ask your thoughts on Clint Eastwood. Because he ended up, as a poll suggested, he ended up to be the most, his message resonated with more people than anyone at the Republican convention.
Well, in very simple, funny terms, he pointed to the fact that the president really has not done anything to turn the economy around. And the empty chair was a funny gimmick. I mean, it kind of played out like a Saturday Night Live skit, I thought. And the good news for the Republicans, quite honestly, is that Clint Eastwood was the story for a solid 5 or 6 days. And I think that enabled people to talk about a little bit of what his message was, but more importantly, that the nitpickers didn't go in and take apart every line that Mitt Romney said, every line that Paul Ryan said. So in that sense, Clint Eastwood really helped capture the tone of the convention.
Let me ask you, did it take away from Mitt Romney and his message?
I don't think so, because I think the message really was very clear. Again, the Republican and the Democratic convention are starting points for the fall campaign. People are not going to formulate their opinion. Look, the people watching those conventions, in my opinion, they've made up their minds.
Those are the party faithful.
They're the guys that are involved, the political junkies. It's now the undecideds will come away with an impression. And I think the impression they come away with from the Republican convention is positive, job creation, and wasn't that kind of cool that Clint Eastwood was there? The impression they come away with the Democrats is, Bill Clinton's still around, and I still like President Obama.
Right.
I think it's solidified both parties' bases, and if I would say the Republicans seem a little bit more on offense than the Democrats, because I think the Democrats spent a lot more time shoring up their base, talking about social issues where you didn't hear that on the Republican side.
I'm going to disagree slightly with my colleague, although I think Bill makes some great points. The first is that I think part of the problem for the Republicans is defining who their base is. There was a lot of silence from me during Paul Ryan's speech and during Mitt Romney's speech, and that's never a good sign. Where's the former president, George Bush, who obviously is around? Why don't they cart him out? And the reason they don't is they recognize that people associate many of these problems with that administration, 8 years of Bush. Thirdly, and I think this is very important, is that it's great if your name becomes a verb, like Tebowing or Eastwooding, but that is sometimes not necessarily a good thing. And while I agree with Bill that this might have been something that was, comical or humorous, it didn't have the effect, it did have the effect of taking the focus off of Romney. In fact, there was too much lead into the candidate. And what was lost in this, again, is Mitt Romney. People wanted an opportunity to get to know this man. And again, just like 4 years ago, when Sarah Palin took the spotlight off John McCain, I think to a certain extent, Ryan took the spotlight off of Romney. We came away knowing less about this candidate than we'd like to.
Well, don't you think, though, it's a little more about the message that came out of the Republican convention in terms of, here's how we're going to create jobs. Here's our focus is going to be on small business, on tax cuts, on that kind of tax relief and deregulation, whereas the Democrats are saying, well, our government policies didn't necessarily work. And to give them the credit, okay, so they didn't work fast enough, and maybe they need 8 years, at least in their argument. But the point is that our policies have not worked, so we have to focus on the personal. We have to present Barack Obama as this friendly guy. Remember, you liked me 4 years ago, whereas the Republicans are in this unique opportunity that they can ask this question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? The answer, if you're one of those 23 million underemployed or unemployed, is no. And that's strong.
Let me
for
ask
the
you a quick
Republicans.
final response on the wives. Obviously, both candidates wanted to come out and say to the American public, we're your guy. Both wives seem to do a very good job of presenting their husbands. Let me ask your impressions of each.
Ann Romney does a great job of doing something that Bill talked about earlier, which is addressing issues of perception around the Republican Party as being a party that's not friendly toward minorities and certainly not friendly toward women and women's issues. And certainly there have been a number of things that have come up over the course of this year that have reinforced that perception. So Ann Romney, in talking about love generically, but speaking specifically to the important roles that women play in government and in the family, certainly addressed that. Michelle Obama, however, was masterful. And I think part of what she was able to do is to reintroduce her husband to the American people. Certainly not the figure that we believed in 4 years ago, but someone who she says, you know, I've grown to love him more over the course of his presidency because I see him every day working to address the needs of the American people. Again, it's that framing that we expect from conventions. I think both wives did a terrific job.
Bill, give you the last one.
You know, Michelle Obama is a great speaker. I actually think if anyone outshined the presidential nominee, it was Michelle outshining Barack in that case. You know, Ann had a different job. Her job was not to give a political speech. Her job was to say, you know, we hear this perception that my husband is out of touch and stiff. Let me tell you about the real man. And I think that will then lend to the credibility that Mitt Romney is approachable. He is a real person. And you know what? He's a serious business leader who actually has a plan to solve the economic problems that are facing the country.
All right, we're going to stop it there, but of course we've got plenty of time to talk more, so we expect to have you guys back and we'll chat it up some more.
You bet,
Yohuru Williams, Bill Spadea, thank you very much for coming on board.